Here's a pitch on the way. He swings and fouls it off, and the man from Walla Walla will take that one home. Swing, there's a drive to left. That one is long gone.
Now, I might have been a small part of your life, but you've been a very large part of mine. And it's my privilege and honor to share with you the greatest game of all.
Hey Nation, what's going on? AJ Reilly here with another episode of The Corner. This is the 20th episode of The Corner since we started doing this during baseball season. Previewing upcoming series, recapping series that just happened. You know, I'm with you in between each and every series at least twice a week. We've also got a leadoff that we are going to get to today, and then some thoughts from the peanut gallery, specifically about some struggling veterans and what the Tigers can or should do. It's really a conundrum, and we're going to get to it. Before we get to any of that, though, I want to make sure that you like and subscribe at our YouTube page. You know, click that thumbs up, hit that bell, and you can also follow The Corner on Twitter at DSN at The Corner for all of your Detroit sports news. So let's get into the leadoff. And every time we start the show, I like to do it in this way with the leadoff and just talk about stuff that just maybe general baseball stuff. We've talked about Mike Trout. We've talked about a number of different things. Rob Manfred and his idiocy. Just anything that comes to mind. And, over the weekend, I've had a number of conversations about like advanced statistics and how they're just so stupid and why old school versus new school. And so I figured, you know what? Let's have a conversation about advanced statistics. Let's talk about why we use things like weighted runs created or weighted on base average or FIP as opposed to something like ERA or RBIs. And I want to start by saying I grew up an old school baseball purist. And there's still a lot of me that is a baseball purist in a lot of ways. I like when guys pimp home runs at this point. Like, I love the personality. But I'm also for throwing inside. And if they're going to pimp a home run, then they better be ready to turn the shoulder. I have no issues with old school. In fact, I love when, the game is played in that way with, unwritten rules, things of that nature. But when I started looking into advanced stats and looked at the way in which advanced stats can help you understand the game even more, then there's no reason to just discount them. Do launch angle matter? Yes, they do. Does exit velocity off a bat matter? Yeah, it does. Does average tell us the type of hitter that someone is? No, it really doesn't. But what needs to be said in all of these situations is just relying on one specific piece of data is missing the entire context. Like everything in life, baseball statistics have to be done in a sense of contextual analysis. Use average as a starting point. But also combine that with their ability to create runs in a weighted runs created plus. Or use it in conjunction with a weighted on base average. And so I want to talk about a few of these things. Some that I like the most as far as advanced statistics go. And then we'll get into the preview and the recap and my final thoughts on the Tigers veterans. So let's talk about things. For decades, average and RBIs were a huge measure of the type of hitter that somebody is and the value that they brought. And in fact, back, during the Hank Greenberg days of Detroit Tigers baseball, he was more concerned about RBIs than he was even home runs, even in the year that he was challenging Babe Ruth's 60 home run record. RBIs are important because they're a team stat, but they are only a stat of opportunity. To measure a hitter's greatness based on their ability to drive in runs is missing context, because if it were not for the team aspect of it, then there's no stat to be had. There's strictly a stat of opportunity. The same is true about pitcher wins. Now, pitcher wins, as far as looking at, oh, this guy's a 20-game winner. Well, yeah, great. He pitched, well enough to win, but what is missing from that context is the fact that his team actually played well enough to win. If a pitcher goes out and throws 6 innings and gives up 5 runs, but his team scored 6, did he pitch great? No. Not necessarily, but he still got the win. And so there's different ways to look at the game of baseball and to look at more predictive type stats and more actual player specific to tell you a profile of how these players will actually be on a baseball field. That's why I use specific measurements when I look at different ways to analyze the game. On base plus slugging is a huge one. On base plus slugging is going to tell us how well they get on base, but also the way in which they drive the ball. It's also used in conjunction with a metric that is called ISO, where ISO accounts for the pure power that a hitter hits with. So a batter that goes 1 for 5 in a game will have an average of 200, but their ISO will be a little bit higher because a double weighs more than, say, a single. Those are important numbers to have. They kind of drill down and help us dig into the type of players that they are. Weighted on base average is actually probably one of the best offensive statistics. It's WOBA, and it accounts for each individual way that a player reaches base. And it's weighted appropriately, so a home run is worth more than a walk. And that's important because as far as run scoring goes, which is the impetuous to baseball, is scoring more runs than the opponent, you need to know how a player's at-bat impacts run scoring. Now let's talk about pitching for a second. Let's talk about ERA. We talk about ERA, and quality starts may be the worst stat that was ever invented, because a guy can go 6 innings, give up 3 or less runs, and it's considered a quality start. But if a guy goes only 6 innings and gives up 3 runs, that's a 4.50 ERA, and we would not consider that great. So we introduce statistics like FIP, which is fielding independent pitching, which takes the balls in play out of the equation and reads like an ERA, so it's truly a pitcher-focused statistic. How effective is that pitcher? If a pitcher has an ERA of like 2.50, but his FIP is like 4.50, that tells you that guy's gotten a lot of help in the field from the fielders that have been putting balls in play and making outs. So I get the hesitation when it comes to looking at advanced stats and going, oh, it's ruining the game of baseball, and oh, nerds are taking over, and da-da-da-da-da. Like, I get all of that. But if you step back for a second and you maybe open the mind a little bit to look at these advanced stats, they can actually tell you a lot more detail than what simply an average or an RBI or an ERA or pitching win can tell you. And honestly can help you to maybe even enjoy the game more. I'll give you a for instance. Always, it seemed when a guy was on second base with nobody out, the old school way of thinking was bunt him over to third. However, run expectancy with a guy on third and 1 out is actually statistically less than a guy on second, nobody out. Does that change your strategy and the way that you look at the game of baseball? It does for me. Bunting may have its place, but it is not necessarily statistically relevant to bunt. And I think that that's important, and I think that if we step back and we look at the way that that game can be played, driven by analytics, is actually more fun and can actually see the way that the game is evolving and it can create better conversations among fans from the old school, which, again, I played on a team, and I'm not pumping my record up, but like I literally played on a small ball team during travel ball. A guy on first, you bunt him to second, you bunt him to third, you get him in. Like, that is how we played, and, it's a way to play, but moving forward, it is not the way. The teams are going to go about playing, especially based on run expectancy and things of that nature. So let's embrace the analytics. Don't lose the old school. Throw inside if a guy pimps a home run. There's nothing wrong with that. The unwritten rules can still exist, but we can still analyze and look at our teams in a different way based on these statistics. And it's something that I've embraced over the last few years, and I think that it is something that is fantastic for someone who wants to understand the game just a little bit more. If you just want to enjoy the entertainment of it, sure, don't embrace it. But if you really want to understand the strategy and you really want to understand player profiles and things of that nature and how this player can impact your team, then embrace the advanced statistics. That's enough nerding out. Let's go ahead and let's talk about Toronto and just the amount of mistakes that were made that cost the Tigers this series. In reality, if you watched these 4 games in Toronto, you were pleasantly surprised with how competitive the Detroit Tigers, one of the worst teams in baseball statistically this year, played against one of the better statistically teams in Major League Baseball. They were very competitive. They did not get blown out in this series, which they very easily could have. But the difference, Toronto made less mistakes. Toronto capitalized on the amount of mistakes that the Detroit Tigers made. And it ended up costing the Tigers 3 games, which puts them 21 games under 500 now during this season. Just a complete disappointment. They made 7 errors in 4 games, and all of them directly led to losses. In Game 1, 2 unearned runs was the difference in the game. In Game 4, 4 errors, coupled with only 3 hits by the offense. And you see why they lost 4-1. The pitching held up well, was not laboring too often, which did have a direct impact on the offense. I mean, Friday night, the Tigers were hitting extra base hits like they were going out of style. They just kept hitting doubles after doubles, which is the best way to score runs, aside from obviously hitting home runs. But doubles, replacing doubles, replacing doubles. We talked about it a lot. And it's something that we talked about in the preview to this series too, that the starting pitching was going to be the key to actually getting the offense going. Because if the offense had to stand on the field for a long time in the first few innings and wait for pitchers to throw strikes and get out of innings, it was going to be a problem. Tyler Alexander had a good start on Thursday. Drew Hutchinson had a great start on Friday and unfortunately had to leave the game after 5 innings after that great play by Cody Clemens at first base. The bullpen was taxed. So Saturday, Derek Law comes in and gives up. He was out of the inning if he just fields his position correctly. But he didn't, and it happens. So at the end of the day, the Tigers lost the series, 3-1. They're 21 games below 500, and I'm just not sure how it's going to get better. I mean, we are talking about if we want any semblance of respect in this record, you have to sweep multiple series in a row, and I just don't think this team is built for it, especially after the trade deadline come Tuesday. I don't think this is as low as it's going to get as far as record goes. I mean, you're only 28 games away from 90 losses. That's no guarantee that it's going to get better. Now, offensively, they had a good offensive series except for Game 4. Seems like they had better approaches. Javi Baez specifically seemed to, he walked. Game 4, hit the home run in Game 4 as well. Reilly Green had a couple big hits. Robbie Grossman, who we're going to talk about later, had a couple of hits as well. What was really nice was being able to showcase Joe Jimenez, Michael Fulmer, Gregory Soto. and the effect that they can have on a game. You know, the Tigers are 27-3 when leading after 7 innings. That's pretty good. That means we have a really good bullpen that should be pretty valuable come Tuesday. But we just can't put it together long enough for a long enough stretch to kind of right the ship. And I just don't know if they're going to be able to. They got 3 games coming up in Minnesota. And the rest of the August schedule does not set up well. They got the Angels towards the end of the month, which seems like on paper the first winnable series that they have. Now, they surprised us against San Diego and can potentially win or squeak out a series that they're not supposed to win, which would be nice. But in order to get any semblance of respectability around this record, you got to do it consistently, multiple weeks on end. And Toronto showed you the holes. Toronto's a good team. They showed you the holes that you have. And how for a team that is not as good as we thought that they were going to be, how important it is to play clean baseball. Ironically, in the game that they did not have a fielding error, they won this series. If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, then it's a freaking duck. Play clean baseball. You cannot afford, with the talent that you have, to make mistakes and give teams extra outs. And they gave teams extra outs, and they made them pay. Now, you know, we place a lot of blame on different places. Al Avila, Chris Ilitch. Haven't really placed too much blame on A.J. Hinch, but I think Saturday he made a mistake by keeping Derek Law in to face Teoscar Hernandez. If at that moment, after that error, he pulls him and brings in Alex Lane, maybe the 3-run home run doesn't get hit. I don't know. I'm not, I don't have a crystal ball or anything like that. And hindsight is always 20/20, but that seems like a mismanagement of bullpen at that point in time. Now, does that mean that I want AJ fired? No, absolutely not. He's the best man for this job. And if you think otherwise, you are thinking incorrectly. But it's time to turn the page. And we turn the page to Minnesota. Seems like we keep playing the same teams over and over thanks to this schedule. But they have 3 games in Minnesota. Minnesota is 8-5 against the Tigers this season, but they are only 3-3 since the All-Star break. So let's get into the pitching matchups. Game 1, you have Tarek Skubal, who will most likely, I read on Twitter a little bit earlier, be facing Aaron Sanchez as a call-up. It's to be determined, but most likely Aaron Sanchez. Then, that game is at 7:40 on Monday. On 7:40 on Tuesday, the Tigers have a to be determined, because, look, the Tigers' pitching situation, starting pitching situation specifically, is just terrible. 15 starting pitchers have been used. And hats off to Brian Garcia. He came in and did a great job against the Blue Jays. Did exactly what he needed to do. Did a good job. But who's going to be starting for the Tigers on Tuesday? To be determined right now. They'll be facing off against Chris Archer on Tuesday. And then in the finale, Wednesday afternoon at 1:10, you have Tyler Alexander getting another start, and he's going to be facing off against Jake Ryan. And let's start with the pitching, which is, we've always talked about, what does the team that we're facing, what do they do well, what do they not do well? The Twins specifically, they struggle in their pitching. They're ranked 26 on Fangraph's dashboard overall in pitching. Relievers and starters combined, they're 26 overall. So the offense, if they can put together good at-bats, can put runs up on the board. And truthfully, we get back to that statistic. Now, it could all change on Wednesday, but if the Tigers can get a lead after 6 innings, that is a very winnable game at that point. So get to their pitching. Have that approach that you had in Toronto, where you scored 4 runs off of All-Star Alek Manoah. That was a fantastic offensive showing. Put together good at-bats. String together multiple good at-bats so that you can push runs across the plate. But what do they do well? Well, they have Luis Arraez. That's number one. I mean, this guy right here, the one in the red shirt on the graphic, this dude is maybe the toughest out in all of baseball. And he has been a thorn in the side this year. Very difficult to get out. Very clutch when it comes to runners on base. Just a very, very, very good baseball player. Their offense is tops in one of the 8th, according to Fangraphs, in the MLB. That is significant. They're a very difficult team. And again, going back to our discussion about, the Tigers pitching staff, it could potentially be a very high scoring series if the Tigers put bats on the ball. Twins pitching staff, not that great. Tigers pitching staff has been somewhat solid, middle of the pack, obviously heavily reliant on our bullpen. And the worst thing that can happen for the Tigers is to get swept and go to 24 games under 500. You need to at least win one of these games to make it even salvageable. Even salvageable. But that remains to be seen. It's going to be an interesting series, especially going to be interesting to see who maybe is not in the clubhouse and the dugout come Wednesday morning, because the trade deadline is Tuesday at 6 p.m. It's going to be very interesting to see who is able to wear that Old English D just a little bit longer for this season. And that brings me to the peanut gallery and some thoughts and the conundrum that the Detroit Tigers have with some veterans, some struggling veterans. The 4 guys on the screen, Jonathan Schoop, Jeimer Candelario, Robbie Grossman, and Tucker Barnhart. What do you do with these guys? Now, Candelario's still under team next year. He could be offered a contract. Jonathan Schoop also still has 1 more year on his deal. Robbie Grossman is a free agent at the end of the season. And Tucker Barnhart is also a free agent at the end of the season. But when we talk about these guys, and I'm going to throw some actual statistics at you. Tucker Barnhart right now has a 29.3% K rate and only walks about 8% of the time. He has an ISO. Remember I said earlier in the show that ISO is just strictly raw power numbers. 0.033. And in case you need a translator for that, it's not good. He's got an average of 201. He's got an on-base percentage of 258 and a slugging percentage of 234. His weighted on-base average, remember taking specific events and weighting them appropriately for how well he gets on base, 225. Again, not good. And his ability to create runs is 58% below Major League average. Weighted runs created is at 42. Major League average is 100. Robbie Grossman. Let's look at Robbie Grossman. Robbie Grossman has an ISO of .077. Strikes out 28% of the time. He does walk about 12% of the time. His average is 205. His on-base percentage is 313. And his slugging percentage is 282. His weighted runs created is only 23% below Major League average. Jeimer Candelario walks 6% of the time, strikes out 23% of the time, does hit for a little bit more power at 161 ISO. He's hitting 211 with an on-base percentage of 273 and a 371 slugging percentage. His weighted on-base average is 284. It's getting respectable. But his weighted runs created is 17% below Major League average at 83, with league average being 100. And finally, Jonathan Schoop. Jonathan Schoop is he's struggled, he's not struggled, he's struggled, he's not struggled. It's overall been a big struggle. 4% walk rate, 20.5% strikeout rate, is not hitting for much power with a 104 ISO. Is hitting 210 with a 246 on base percentage and a 314 slugging percentage. His weighted on base average again is getting too low at 246, and he is 44% below major league average as far as weighted runs created. What do you do with these guys? What do you do with them? You can't send them down. They are all ineligible to be sent down to the minor leagues, and it wouldn't do anything anyway. But you got two guys here. Candelario, I think, is going to finish out the season with the Tigers, and then I believe he will not be offered a contract in 2023. All that will be dependent upon if they have somebody to replace him at third base, and the third base free agents for 2023 are not great. So maybe he does get one more chance. Jonathan Scope most likely will not be DFA'd. Maybe potentially traded, but I mean that would be, we're talking about being traded for a pack of Big League Chew. Still owed money next year. I don't know. But I do think that he at least finishes the season with the Tigers. Now, Robbie Grossman, as much as I hate to say it, is probably looking at a DFA. The outfield is crowded as it is. You got 5 guys for 3 spots right now. It's crowded. Most likely, Grossman's going to see a DFA. Tucker Barnhart should be replaced by Eric Haas moving forward, and could be a good backup catcher position, and could potentially even be a piece in a trade for a team that maybe is looking for a good defensive catcher because he's just not hitting the ball. So the 4 guys, you're most likely looking at 2 of them not finishing the season and 2 of them finishing the season. And this is the conundrum that a team that's rebuilding has, is when you have veterans that are struggling, what type of message are you sending to free agents? Because if you just automatically cut a veteran that's struggling, DFA him or whatever, that can create a problem for potential free agents in the way that you treat veterans. But at the same time, it's like walking this fine line because you have young guys that need consistent run to see what you have. Robbie Grossman is a perfect example of this. He blocks Akil Baddoo. Akil Baddoo has had his struggles and could very well be in a hole that's going to be difficult for him to dig out of. But can he dig out of that playing 1 out of every 3-4 days? I don't know. So if we remove Grossman from the equation, then you have Willie Castro, you have Victor Reyes, you have Akil Baddoo, and you have Reilly Green, who can get more run. It's a conundrum, and it's going to be interesting to see what the Tigers do, and I would expect moves to be made by the end of the week. Once the trade deadline has settled down, and once players have found their new homes for the rest of the season, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens come Friday, come Saturday, because that's going to really kind of set in motion looks for 2023 and what potentially the Tigers have for 2023. You got guys knocking on the door. Kerry Carpenter is lighting it up in AAA. Now, he's not the answer, okay? Like, he's not a savior type. And if we fall in love with these prospects, you got to understand the jump from AAA to the major leagues is a significant jump. But there's nothing wrong with seeing what you have in a very, very disappointing season. And sometimes that means cutting the guys that are blocking. So it'll be interesting to see. Tigers take on the Minnesota Twins for 3 games in Minnesota. Hopefully they can scratch out a victory there. This has been The Corner. I do want to remind you to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and click that bell to get notifications around Detroit Sports Nation news. Follow this show on Twitter at DSN at The Corner. I am AJ Reilly, and I will see you before the next series this weekend. And as always, go Tigers.
Man on a mission, I'ma get it. You know I be on a what?